thank you for joining us. Welcome, Cynthia. Cynthia Peters has been the editor of The Change Agent since June 2007. Her focus at The Change Agent is to create a magazine that teaches reading, writing, math, and critical thinking in the context of social issues that are relevant to adult learners. To further support classroom learning, Cynthia has aligned the lesson and extensions in the magazine with the college and career readiness standards. She presents at national and state adult education conferences on a variety of topics, including persistence, civic participation, math, digital literacy, and using socially relevant materials that are aligned with the college and career readiness standards. From 2013 to 15, she taught the online persistence course for world education. She currently teaches ESOL in a workplace-based program in Boston, and since 2002 has taught a wide range of adult education classes, including ABE, GED, Bridge to College, and the Adult Diploma Program. So welcome, Cynthia, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Krista and Beth and Deb and everybody at Train for working with me to get this started. The census, I've learned about it over time, over the past 6 months or so, and the more I've learned, the more I realize how important it is for all of our communities. The title of this webinar is The Census is an Educational Opportunity, and I realize that I kind of mean that in two senses. One is it's a socially relevant topic that you can teach basic skills in the context of, and the other is that the census partly determines how much resources we get from the federal government into our communities, and that affects our ability to provide education to adults. So in both ways, the census is an educational opportunity. So I'm really glad to be here to share the ideas that I have put together over time. And I want to say that even though my bias is going to be obvious, that I think the census is important, that it matters to all of our communities, I just want to say from the very beginning that for teachers and program directors and when we're face-to-face with students, it's not our job so much to tell students what to do. We're not doing this because we're trying to say to students, you must fill out the census. We're trying to share information with them so they can make the best choice they can make for them in their lives. And so that's always my starting place anytime, even when it's something I feel strongly about. I still feel that the important position for us in programs and as teachers is that we're sharing information that we think is relevant and matters so that students can make up their own minds about what they want to do. So going forward for this hour, here's what we're going to cover. In addition to the welcome and the introductions, which we just talked about, there will be a slide indicating that this is the first in a series of 6 webinars, and on the slide I list for you the subsequent 5 and the dates. And so just so you know, we're rolling out a bunch of materials here related not just to the census, but also to the elections, because it turns out 2020 is a very big year for civics. So we have a great opportunity to bring so much civics material into our classroom. We're going to look at why the census matters in general, as well as some specifics about Texas. And we're going to discuss the balancing of risks and benefits related to participating in the census. And then finally, we're going to wrap up and just, if you have questions, you can pose them then. I'll also be sharing some resources with you, which you can take with you into your future thinking about this. And by the way, I don't mean to imply that questions are only for the end. I really welcome any questions all along the way. If I say something controversial or something that catches your attention and you want to me to back up and revisit it, please just put something in the chat box. You can even write, whoa, wait, hold on one second. And I'm going to be trying to monitor the chat box while I go, but also Krista's going to be monitoring it with me. So somebody will notice your question and we will make sure to incorporate it. And I prefer to hear your questions as we go along. So please don't be shy about commenting or questioning as we go along. Okay, here are the 6 webinars. So the first one today is just an overview of some of the big topics. And then the subsequent ones are all going to be on the first Tuesday of the month. They're all going to be at 3 o'clock Central Time. The next one, which is just in a few weeks, is going to be about jobs. The Census Bureau is hiring hundreds of thousands of people. And some of them could be our students. And this is a really excellent career pathway possibility for students because they get paid training, they get to add something to their resume, they get digital experience because the census enumerators are going to be going out with these digital tablets, to collect information. It's relevant for our more advanced ESL students or ABE students. And I'm going to have a webinar about that. And February 4th is not too late to be hearing about that. The Census Bureau is encouraging people to apply through February. And you'll see the rest. I won't mention them all, but a few more on the census and then the last 2 on the electoral process and other forms of civic engagement. So I really hope you come back for all of these or come back for the ones that you're most interested in. You spread the word to your fellow teachers and program folks to join us for this, what I hope will just be a great series that's really rooted in, current events and stuff that is going to be coming up for our students. And it's a way to connect a relevant historical moment to learning basic skills. Okay, I wanted to, very early in this webinar, just give you a sense of the timeline for the census. I don't know what's too basic for people, what people already know, and what really is eye-opening. So bear with me. If this is something you're already familiar with, bear with me here. In March, all of us are going to start receiving postcards or paper surveys. And the postcard will have a URL on it, inviting us to go online and fill out the census questionnaire online. The Census Bureau, for the first time, is hoping that the majority of the returns will be done online. In April, they're going to send out reminder letters and more reminder letters and really try to get as many responses online and by paper through the month of April, because then in May and June, what's going to happen is they're going to start calling people and visiting them in person. So if people don't fill out the census, they might think they've sort of skirted having to deal with it, but in fact, what they might be doing is inviting a phone call or even a visit. So it is required by law to fill out the census. I don't tend to make a really big deal about that because it's not like they go around prosecuting people too much or anything like that. What you might get is fined, but I don't think they even do that very often. But it's not even like voting. It's actually required by law to fill out the census. So not filling it out, you might think you're avoiding attention, but in fact you might be inviting more attention. So I thought, as I said, I'm not sure how much people know or don't know, but I thought I would start us out with a friendly quiz. And Krista and Beth have very nicely put all these questions together into a poll. And I really appreciate that. And I hope nobody takes this too seriously. This is just kind of for fun, to get us started, to get us warmed up, to sort of see the lay of the land and the kind of some of the odder elements of the census. So I thought the way we would do this is you can see it. You should be able to see it on your right panel. If you're sitting with other people, that's great. You guys can consult with each other and figure out what you think the right answer is. I'm not going to give you a huge amount of time to ponder these questions, but I'll read them out loud, and then you can click your answer, and then at the end we'll see, the correct answers, and we'll see how people did. So the first question, the first census was in 1790. At that time, were enslaved people counted, not counted, or counted as 3/5 of a person? So go ahead and take a minute, or less than a minute really, to click what you think is the right answer. I'm going to move on to question 2. Historically, many groups of people have been undercounted in the census. In 2010, the group most likely to be undercounted was A, Native Americans, B, small children, C, foreign-born residents, or D, people without a permanent address. Which group was most likely to be undercounted? How about number 3? In Texas, for each person not counted in the 2020 census, the state will lose per year $1,578 per person per year, 1,023, 257, or 5,459. Okay, how about a true-false question? The Census Bureau can share individual data with a court for a felony case. Is that true or false? And number 5, the census data protections have been put in place because in the past, that data was used to A, identify Black neighborhoods for redlining, B, round up Japanese residents into internment camps, or C, identify non-citizens for immigration enforcement. Okay, and our last one, which I think is probably our weirdest one, which of the following does the Census Bureau not list as a race? American Indian, Korean, Latino. So which one is not a race according to the Census Bureau? All right, those are our 6 questions. And I think what's going to happen next is we might see some real-time results and have a little chance to go over some of these things.
Okay, does everybody answer that wants to answer?
Yeah, there's some brain teaser ones in there, I have to say.
Okay, I've got, time is up, and I'm going to go ahead and close this poll and share with the attendees and apply. And hopefully this works.
Oh, great. Oh, I love this because this shows real diversity in answers here. That means we're on the right track by asking these questions, which is great. They weren't too easy. All right, good. Let's just look at them together. The first census was in 1790, and enslaved people were counted as 3/5 of a person. This is a really interesting social studies lesson. You know, the census just gives us such rich content to look at, not just for reading and writing skills, filling out forms, digital literacy, and all that stuff, but also just historical understanding, social studies questions, how does the government work? And this particular question goes to something called the 3/5 compromise, which some people might be familiar with, which goes back to the times when the southern states wanted slaves to be counted because it would increase their population so they would have more representation in Congress. And the pushback was that slaves shouldn't be counted because they couldn't vote, and there was something called a 3/5 compromise that came out of that. So a very rich historical thing to look into with students, and in the context of that, you can learn a lot about U.S. history. How about number 2, which is the most undercounted group? Okay, yes, people, this is a hard one. A lot of people got it wrong. The correct answer is B, small children, believe it or not. I mean, I totally with you all who picked foreign-born and people without a permanent address. That makes a lot of sense to me too. But it's actually people just chronically leave off small children. They fill out the census and just don't count their babies. And they think, oh, you know, that doesn't matter. I don't have to. But it actually precisely does matter to know, of course, about children because, you know, 10 years, over the next 10 years, those children are going to grow up. They're going to need resources. They're going to need schools. They're going to need health care. But children tend to be, you know, the most undercounted group. How about in Texas, each person not counted? Yeah, a lot of people got this right. The answer is A. It's $1,578. So for each person not counted, that is the potential loss to Texas. And if it's a family of 5, you would multiply that by 5, or a family of 6 or 7 or whatever, and then you would multiply it again by 10 because it's per year. So you know, it's a lot of money. If one family does not get counted, that's a lot of money that the state of Texas doesn't get. How about number 4, this true or false? The Census Bureau can share information about a felony. And of course, the answer is false. The Census Bureau is not allowed to share information with any agency for any reason, according to Title 13 of the U.S. Code. So that doesn't mean that we can totally trust that some situation might not arise where the government would go back on this. We can talk about more about that later. But the current law, and people can be forgiven for not trusting that the law will be upheld, but the current law is that the Census Bureau cannot share private data with any other agency under any circumstances. Number 5, census data protections have been put into place for what reason? Oh, I see a minority actually got the correct answer here. The correct answer is B. So during World War II, and it is often during times of war that the government, does a workaround around the laws that has in place. The military, the Census Bureau shared information with the military about where Japanese residents, people of Japanese descent lived. Some of these people of Japanese descent, might have been third-generation Americans at this point, but their addresses the Census Bureau had their addresses and shared those addresses with the military, and the military rounded people up. And as you know, many people of Japanese descent were put in internment camps during World War II. Number 6, which of the following does the census not consider race? The correct answer is Latino. It's a very interesting and confusing part of the questionnaire. There's only 9 questions in the questionnaire, but 2 of them are about ethnicity and race. And in the first question about ethnicity and race, the Census Bureau makes very clear that they do not consider Latino to be a race, and they want you to first identify if you're Latino or not Latino. And then after you make that distinction, you go on to say what race you are, because you could be white Latino or African Latino or something else. So, and interestingly, I know that Korean is something that I stumble over. The census does not ask if you are Asian. It only asks for you to identify which country you have your origins in. So another interesting twist and another interesting thing that I think our learners are going to stumble over when they try to fill out the questionnaire. So that's why, there's so many learning opportunities in the census, just even trying to fill out the questionnaire, but certainly zooming out and taking into account a lot of social studies and U.S. government type questions as well. Thank you all so much for participating in that quiz. I hope it kind of felt exciting to you to sort of see the questions that we can be addressing when we talk about the census. And I love how everybody jumped in there and did their best. So thank you so much. And thank you, Krista, for running that for us.
You're welcome. And Cynthia, excuse me, there's a question in the chat pod, and I think this was going back to question number 2, about how about people who are disabled, the ones that were undercounted.
What are their numbers for being undercounted?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know the answer. And when I have looked at, like, for example, when I looked up for Texas, who are the most undercounted groups, that does not show up as a category, interestingly enough. So, yeah, good question. And I'm sorry to say I don't know the answer, except to say that they're not showing up on lists of most undercounted. But that's a good place to look into. And also, what accommodations does the census have set up for disabled people? Thank you for raising that. Okay, let's back up a little bit and talk about the census in general. So why do we say the census is so critical to our democracy? Well, there's 2 main reasons. One is that based on this count, the federal government divvies up federal resources to the states. So it's based on this decennial count that the states get federal government funding. So it's a big deal, and it sets the figure for the next 10 years. Also, representation. As you know, our representatives in the House are based on our population, so that we get 2 senators no matter how populated our state is, but we get representatives based on how populated our state is. So if we're losing population, we lose representation. If we're gaining population, we gain representation. But if people aren't counted, then we won't be adequately represented in Congress. What do I mean when I say funding? Well, interestingly, the previous research, the previous figure that's been floated around, and you might see it in other webinars and other articles and things, is a figure that's more like $800 billion in funding per year from the federal government to the states. But an article that I just read on Fortune.com says that the number is really more like 1.5 trillion. And so it's a lot of money. And it goes for things like education, housing, health, and the services that our students need. So not only does it directly fund education, but it funds the things that our students need that make it possible for them to come to school, right? It's part of the social safety net that keeps people going so that they can carve out the time and energy in their lives to come to school. So it's really important for all of our communities and especially our students. I thought it was interesting to share this slide because we talk about how the census decides how we get represented in Congress. And when you look at this map, you might, you see the red and the blue, the red being Republican areas and the blue being Democratic. And why, if the 116th Congress is majority Democrat, why does the country look so overwhelmingly red and not blue? I see Deb saying, boy, we really need to make sure we get the word out to our students and staff. We need all the money we can get for our folks. Yeah, thank you, Deb. I appreciate that. It's such a good point. I mean, the money matters to our students and to all of us on so many levels. And the political representation matters too, because who's going to be in the federal government lobbying for the things we need in our local communities? It's going to be our state reps. So if we're underrepresented, then our voice isn't being heard in Congress. Yeah, so I see Lori saying the placement of the majority of the population in California and New York. Basically, the urban centers have the vast majority of the population, and those urban centers tend to be more blue than red. And then the more rural areas of the United States tend to be more red. So it looks like there's vast expanses of red. But as my next slide says, it's people who vote, not land. And so this is a wonderful GIF, and I can't unfold the GIF for you in all of its glory, but you can Google it by just searching for land doesn't vote, people do, GIF, and you'll find it that way. There's also a URL down there at the bottom, which if you have the patience to type that in, you can type that in. It's a really sweet GIF. It kind of shows the mostly red country with the blue metropolitan pockets, and then it kind of uncovers the white space, indicating kind of more rural land and unpopulated or less populated land. And so you see where the population centers are and why our Congress might be currently more blue than it is red, because of how the populations are gathered together in the big cities. I see Garrett saying, doesn't Los Angeles alone have more people than most red states? That's that would be a fun thing to start looking at these things in math, in your math class. Like one time I read that California is the 4th largest economy in the world, in the whole world. So it's only a state in our country, but it's the 4th largest economy. So there's some interesting stuff you can look at with this. Anyway, just a fun thing to share in class, a fun visual to kind of remind us about how representation works and why the census matters, why being counted matters. Okay, so now let's get more specific about Texas. I'll move into sort of discussing Texas more specifically and see if what else might come up. So here's some things I discovered about Texas. So between 2000 and 2010, Texas added over 4 million residents and gained 3 congressional seats. That's a pretty big deal. And since the last census, Texas has added over 3.5 million. So currently you're positioned to get at least 2 more additional seats. So somebody else is going to be losing seats, and Texas might be gaining seats. So if, to make sure that issues Texans are facing are being heard in the federal government, you want to make sure you get all your people counted. Don't forget, districting and representation is based on people, not citizens, and not voters. It's all people. Children, obviously, all children, all people, documented, undocumented, foreign-born, voting, not voting. It doesn't matter. All people is what is counted to determine representation. Giddy up. Okay, Deb. We're getting a little Texas flair. Thank you. Well, here's another thing that is really relevant to our students, I think, and that is that, businesses and community organizations use the data from the census to determine where they might want to locate their businesses. Because, where are there going to be people that are going to be needing jobs? And this is obviously really important to our students. It's important to us. So if our community is undercounted, a business is going to be surveying the census data and say, well, let's not put our business there. There's nobody there who can work in our business. And so we just want to make sure we don't miss out on that opportunity. The private sector uses this data a lot. And then as for funding, in 2016, Texas did receive $59.4 billion, and all of that money was based on census data. And these are some of the things that money supports. And, you can see the list of things there. It's all really important to all of us. Do we have decent highways and roads so that we can get to our jobs, so that we can get to school, so that our businesses can function? Do we have housing? Do we have health care? Do we have the kind of supports we all need to be able to just to live our lives? An undercount of Texas of just 1% could translate into a loss of $300 million in federal funding for the state. Just 1%. That's not hard to undercount your whole entire population by 1%. That is pretty easy to do that. So, we think that adult ed programs are really well positioned to help avoid an undercount, or at least minimize an undercount. There's this wonderful interactive map that you can find online. You can just Google hard to count areas, or you can go to the URL that's there at the bottom of the slide. And you can get a whole map of the United States. I did a screenshot of just Texas, and I kind of erased out New Mexico and Oklahoma and Louisiana, just so that we could just focus in on Texas. But those neighboring states have a lot of hard-to-count communities as well. But you can see in Texas, there's whole swaths of land that the Census Bureau considers hard to count. So I don't have the key up here, but the darker the color, the harder to count the area is. And I don't know where all of you are located. I imagine we have people coming in from Texas, from all parts of Texas. If you open this map, you can zoom in much, much further, and you can see your county even. Like, you can spot little tiny orange dots there in the center. You can zoom in on that and see what county that is, see what area that is, and figure out why it's hard to count. The census gives you lots of information about what's hard to count about it, what the percentage of forms were that were returned, and things like that. So I encourage you to go look at this map, look at where your program is. Later on in the slideshow, I'm going to share another map of Texas, which includes something called complete count committees. And those complete count committees have basically committed to trying to get a complete count in their neighborhood. So that is a group you could join up with if you wanted. But that's not going to come till a little bit later. But so don't feel like all is lost. There's a lot of people in Texas working on this, and there's a lot of resources that you can use to try to kind of start rolling out some get out the count efforts. So I see Olga says, I heard there were a lot of people moving from California to Texas. Yeah, I've heard about that too, like a big sort of exodus from maybe more expensive places that people live, or people feel like there's more economic opportunity in Texas for whatever reason. If people are coming to Texas, they should be counted. So who is hard to count? So this is from a website, demographics.texas.gov. These are the main categories of hard to count groups. Obviously, people overlap in these categories a lot. If you go to this website and look at this information, if you click on each one, you get data about each one, like what percentage of Texans are renters, what percentage are single-parent households, what percentage are low income. And so you get a feeling for, what percentage of Texans are hard to count. I saw some data about California where they said that, 3 out of 4 people in California fall into at least one of these categories. So that's pretty impressive. California, very, very populous state, and 3 out of 4 of the people there fall into one of the hard to count groups. So it's not just the geographical area, it's the demographic that people fall into. And do you see a lot of our students showing up in these categories? Except for the children under 5, I'm guessing we see a lot of our students in several of these categories. How do they count people who are in nursing homes or institutions, or is it just households? So yeah, that is a good question. So when you get your form in the mail, you're supposed to count everybody in your household. And you're not supposed, if you have somebody who was in your home who's now, say, in college or in the military or in a nursing home or perhaps in prison, you do not count them. Those institutions will be counted another way by the census. If your college student age child lives with you, then you do count that person. If somebody's sort of in rehab, like they're in a nursing home kind of temporarily for a few weeks or something, then you would count them as part of your household. So if it's somebody who lives with you most of the time, but they just don't happen to be there right then because they're in the hospital or in a temporary rehab thing or something like that, then you would count them, but not if they're kind of living permanently in another institution. Okay, and that does include prison, and that's another whole controversy actually, because prisons, when prisoners are counted in the community that the prison is, it can sometimes double the population of that rural community. So there's an interesting debate going on in states right now about where prisoners should be counted. It should be counted where they're from and where they might be going back to. Say they're just doing 2 years in prison. If they're counted in that county where the prison is, and then they go back to their hometown, they haven't been counted in their hometown, they've been counted in the prison county. So there's a bunch of controversy about that, and another interesting place to kind of research and have students look into that. Any other questions there? That was a really good question. I think that's the kind of thing that our students are going to be asking, and the more confident we feel about being able to answer questions like that, the easier it's going to be for our students. There's it's an unbelievable amount of nuance, though. You think it's pretty straightforward, but I think another reason why children under 5 tend to be undercounted is because sometimes children split households. They might live part-time with one parent and part-time with another parent, or they might be currently living with their grandmother, but due to come back to their parents any day now, or just things like that. And so how do you count those children? And I do have more information about that, but I'm not going to get into that too much right now, because in future webinars we're going to cover more of that kind of content. I want to keep getting through some more of this general stuff. There's a great document online. You learned in the quiz that $1,578 per person per year would be lost in an undercount in Texas. The place I got that information is this George Washington Institute of Public Policy. You can find that document. The URL is there. You can find it by Googling GWIPP and then counting for dollars Texas or something like that, and that will also get it to you. But that gives you more information about the programs that are going to be affected the most by an undercount. So what I did was I took that document and I took the top 10 most funded programs and I put them into this little donut chart. And the type is a little bit small, but I hope you can mostly read it. You can see the biggest bit of funding goes to Medicaid in the state. And then the next biggest is SNAP. That's your supplemental nutrition, your food stamps, basically. Medicare Part B, highways, school lunches, local education, children's health insurance program, Section 8 vouchers, special education grants, and Head Start. So those are the top 10. You can look at the PDF for Texas and get more detail if you want, but I thought that it was interesting just to notice the top 10. These are going to be very affected by an undercount. So let's just pause here a minute. Everything you've heard so far right now, I don't know if it's felt motivating or confusing or what it's felt like, but imagine, you're bringing in the census to your classroom or into your program. What obstacles are you going to face, or what obstacles are learners going to face? What are they going to say to you? How are they going to be suspicious? And what are they going to give them pause when they think about participating in the census? Any thoughts there? What's going to come up for people for the most part? How do you think students are going to feel about going online, perhaps on their phone, clicking on a URL, and putting in their address, their phone number, the names of everyone in their family, their ethnicity? Yes, Maria says they will be reported, right? Fear of revealing too much information, yeah. A question they might ask is, who will access or use this information? Mauro says, I'm sure forms will be in various languages. Yes, the forms are going to be in many, many languages. The paper forms that are mailed to addresses are going to come out in English and Spanish only, but online you can get multiple other languages. And also there's going to be people hired by the census who speak various languages who'll be able to fill out your census over the phone. You could call them on the phone and talk to them in your native language and fill out the census that way too. Conspiracy theories, yeah, there's so much. There already is a lot of fake news about the census. It's circulating. The census has a whole website for reporting rumors and for reporting on rumors because that's a big problem. And then also some people might just feel blasé about it. They've already got Siri listening to them every day, and they're not going to be that worried about their data. Yeah, I have so much to say about all the things that people are bringing up. One important point to make here is that the census is used for aggregate data. It's not, the individual information is not what matters. It only matters insofar as it's aggregated. And so that's the great vocabulary word right there. If you're teaching the census and talking about what that means, why does aggregated data, why is that what matters? And in terms of safety and privacy, I've read a lot of articles about this, and I haven't totally mastered what this means, but apparently the statisticians have this approach to the data where they inject noise, quote unquote noise, into the data so that it's not, you could potentially hack into the Census Bureau's website and hack into other websites and line up, say, driver's license data against census data and find people. Or make determinations about which blocks in which cities have the most residents with Middle Eastern last names or Latino last names or something like that. But the Census Bureau has this approach of injecting noise into the data to make it harder to disaggregate it, but to still make the data where the data would still be meaningful. More about that in future webinars. But for now, I see lots happening in the chat group. Somebody in EL Civics is saying students will not be willing to complete this form. In fact, they may leave the program in fear that we will report them. That's very heavy. I'm very glad you said that. It just makes me sit still for a minute to take in the gravity of that. It's so important that you raised it. I think what always matters when we're presenting information is that we are very clear that we're talking to adults and that as adults we know that people are going to make their own decisions about what's right for them. Withholding the information, in my opinion, isn't going to help because they're going to be hearing about this and they're going to be hearing alternative information, possibly alternative facts and possibly fake news. But just to always be clear that people make up their own minds about what to do. I hope that's enough. And I hope nobody would actually leave a program just because the census came up. But we may need to put our collective wisdom together to think about how to make sure we raise this sensitively enough that that doesn't happen. So in no way do I want to be glib about this. It's not an easy topic. So yeah, everybody, we've kind of touched on, these are going to be some of the big challenges. The fears about privacy, obviously, it's a huge one, and we have to respect that fear. And the government has there's been many instances, unfortunately, where the government said one thing and did another. So far be it from me to say, no problem, you can trust the government. That's not my messaging at all. If anything, my messaging is more a balancing of risks and benefits. And that is the posture that I have about this whole thing, is to understand the benefits of the census and to understand the risks, and then to make a private decision. Scams and fraud are going to be legion. There's a whole bunch of lesson plans and ways to teach about this. There's a whole list of things that no census worker will ever ask you, like, for example, your social security number, or, lots of things that if somebody asks you that question, then they're not a legitimate census worker. Because so much of it's going to be online, it's going to involve digital skills, it's going to involve having access to the internet, which a lot of people don't. That whole piece is going to possibly be a challenge. And then obviously literacy skills and motivation. Like, why should I fill this out? What's the point? And also, when you're filling it out and the questions are kind of confusing, you might go, I don't want to do this. It's annoying. I don't fit in any of these boxes. I don't know which thing to check off. I don't know how to answer this question, and I feel unseen and invisible, and so I'm just not going to do it. So a lot of our coaching and a lot of our teaching will be around kind of making it through the form, um, assuming somebody wants to fill out the form. As we already discussed, based on our quiz, the government cannot share your information with any other agency. Federal law prohibits it. The census staff take a lifetime oath to protect census responses. They can get severe penalties if they violate it. There's, a lot of reasons why, there's a lot of precautions that have been taken. And not only that, but, human rights organizations are sort of standing by, like where if anything happens, where there's any risk of something happening, they're standing by to stop the information from being shared. But, people, even if you aren't worried about, say, immigration getting your data, you might be sort of living illegally with a lot of relatives, and maybe your cousin's family had a fire in their apartment and they're all staying with you and your landlord doesn't know, and you don't want to reveal that you have 10 people staying in your 2-bedroom apartment because it's against your lease and it's a violation of your lease, so you don't want to put it on a census document. Totally understandable, but according to Title 13 of U.S. Code, this information that you have 10 people staying in your 2-bedroom apartment would not be shared with anybody. That is what I know. Again, up to everybody to decide what to do. You all know that, for a while, the citizenship question was proposed to be included in the census, and the Supreme Court struck it down. So there is no citizenship question on the census. There's confusion about this, though, because for one thing, it was such a big deal in the media for a while, and people might not realize that actually it got struck down. So to repeat, there is no citizenship question on the census. However, it does show up on this thing called the American Community Survey, which is another survey carried out by the Census Bureau. And that's a whole different survey. It does ask about citizenship. That's not the census, though. So important to just know that fact. So what are some things you can do now as adult education providers? I mean, one thing is just start thinking about your own role, and maybe in your staff meetings or just with other teachers, you start thinking together about what role you might want to play. There's a lot of different things programs can do. There's classroom materials, lots and lots of lesson plans being generated, and I'm sending you to this nelrc.org website, which is starting to collect a lot of resources. And there's also program resources. So in the next webinar, we're going to be talking about this idea about how programs can connect with your local complete count committee. People can train to be census ambassadors, which means that they learn a little bit more about the census, and then there's kind of somebody who's poised to talk in their community about the census. So there's lots of different things that programs and classrooms can do, and please do visit this website, and please come to the next webinar to get more specific information about that. A big important piece is that students can apply to work as census enumerators. A great opportunity for our students. The pay is it's a pretty wide range of pay, to be honest. So in some areas it's going to be on the lower side, in some areas higher. But the application is online. The Census Bureau is really welcoming people who are bilingual because they want people from their own communities to be doing the door knocking in those communities, to be able to speak to their neighbors in the language they're most comfortable in, people who might actually know their neighbors and feel more confident talking to them. You can set your own schedule. It doesn't affect your benefits. Some people might go, I can't go get a part-time job. I'll lose all my benefits that I painstakingly applied for. In fact, actually, we need to double check this for Texas, but the federal government has recommended to all the states that they not count census worker income against benefits. So yeah, in February is when they're going to start hiring census takers. So in that webinar, I'm going to try to give you as much information as you can to help your students apply for these jobs if you think you have people who might be good candidates for that. Oh, also one more point. The census says that technically they cannot hire people who are not citizens. However, they always leave this little opening for themselves where they say, at the end of the day, if they don't have enough speakers of the languages that they need, they will hire non-citizens. You just have to be able to legally work in the U.S. but they're hoping that most people are going to be citizens, but if they're not, they will at the end. So they want people to apply even if they're not citizens, and then be on standby in case they need the speaker of that language. Okay, I have about 5 more minutes left, and I just want to end with a couple of these points that the census is an opportunity to teach these basic skills, including digital literacy, including career awareness, and also just leadership. It's a critical thinking opportunity. You're not asking people to open up and shove in something that you're telling them to do. You're asking them to think critically about what they want to do in their lives based on the information that you're sharing. Be transparent. Explain why you're teaching these materials. That's a really important persistence driver when you're clear about your goals and you're clear. You might sort of even confess to having a bias about it, like I did at the beginning of this webinar, but your point isn't for them to adopt uncritically your bias. Your point is for them to make up their own minds. I want to just quickly let you get a visual of this slide. This is where the complete count committees are. This is a great interactive map. You can click on those little thumbtacks, and you will see an actual email address of a contact person. It's practically miraculous. Usually you feel like these things are, what do they really add up to? But it's actually a real person, a real organization that you can contact. So if you want to zoom in closer and find where you are on this map and see your closest complete count committee, that might be a good partner for you if your program is thinking about getting involved in any of this. Okay, lastly, there's a slide with some resources that you can go to these URLs, find classroom activities, program activities. That last one, the bit.ly, it's a whole Google folder, which is very active, and teachers are just loading it up with lesson plans and teaching ideas. So there's just no lack of go-to sites for information and lessons and things like that. So I have a couple minutes. I've talked a lot at you, and I've seen some great questions and comments. And if anybody has another thing they want to add, a little question they want to add or a comment before we go, I would love to see your question. And while I'm waiting to see what might show up there, just a reminder, February 4th is going to be another webinar about the jobs, applying for the jobs, and also thinking about this idea of census ambassadors. So this is something we've been developing, a whole kind of curriculum and strategy for leadership development, sharing information, inviting students to play this role in their community or in their program. So thank you, Deb, for that question. Mauro, thank you for the information and resources. See you February 4th at 3 p.m. Yeah, thank you for the reminder about the timing. And then after that, the first Tuesday of every month at 3 p.m. Central Time, we're going to be really digging in deep and finding some really rich resources to share with you all. Thank you so much for what you do out there in the field and on the front lines with students and with all of you practitioners. I really appreciate you being out there. I really appreciate having this hour with you. Thank you so much for spending it with me. And please feel free to email me and be in touch if you have any questions.
Thank you, Cynthia, so very much. This is wonderful. I learned a lot myself. So remember, February 4th, 3 o'clock is the next census webinar. That will be in the portal for registration. Thanks again, Cynthia.
Thank you so much. Thank you.